Get around to it. What holds you back from decision making? Yeah, we make decisions every day, right? But as we all know, some decisions, they come a little easier than others, right? Some choices come to us quickly, others maybe not so much. And we find ourselves sometimes maybe procrastinating or worrying or fretting until we get around to it. And then by the time we get around to it, time's not always going to be on our side because we put it off and lamented over it. And we end up then making a decision under duress. So today we're going to take a look at decision making and what holds us back from getting around to it, right? So let's just go ahead and get to it already. So these are the peeps on the screen that were inspiration for this training, and they're where my sources for the training when I developed it have come from. They're authors, they're speakers, podcasters, and even licensed psychologists here in the mix. Did you know that researchers estimate that we make upwards to 35,000 decisions a day? That's a lot, right? So, for example, each day begins with decisions, whether or not to hit the snooze button or what you're going to wear to work or, which mug you're going to use for your coffee or tea. And if you're like me, how much cream am I going to put in? So we make tons of decisions every day, all the way from those little things to biggies like, are we finally going to decide to have that tough conversation with a colleague that we said we'd get around to, right? Or trying to decide which bill to pay and how much to pay on it, or wondering if you should go back to school or not. You know what yours are. Okay, so what I'll challenge you during this next, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes or so is to think of what decisions you have on your plate right now, what you might be struggling with, and think of it throughout this session because maybe there's something here that we can share that might help you in that decision-making process, okay? So before we move too much further forward, let's take a look at our objectives. We got 3 of them here. All right, so we're going to jump into our first objective, which is understanding the power of intuition in our decision making. All right, so there is some power in our decision making. Right? We're bouncing around here a little bit. So some of that power can actually be credited to the science of our own physiology, if you will, that can help us make our decisions. So let's take a look first here at the human brain because it's the most sophisticated organ, bar none, right? Physiology and neurology are sciences that study how our minds, bodies, and our neurological systems are all interconnected. And it's this interconnectedness of those that serve as the foundation for what we refer to and call our intuition. Let's start first by taking a look at this temporal lobe of the brain. Sometimes we refer to that area as our subconscious mind, right? So this is where we process stored information, our memories, our emotions. It's where we recall past experiences and our past knowledge. That's all happening right here in that temporal lobe of the brain. Then let's look at the prefrontal cortex, so that frontal lobe of the brain. And this is kind of what we refer to sometimes as our rational or thinking brain. It's the part that's responsible for things like logic and critical thinking and learning new things. So basically, it's the part of the brain that tells us to doubt that gut or intuition when it comes to decisions, because a decision made from that part of the brain, it doesn't have any concrete rationale, right? It's just a gut decision, but not true, because that frontal lobe of the brain is really what helps. It's responsible for learning new things. So we take that new stuff once we've got it learned and push it back to that temporal lobe of our brain, and it's stored there for us for future reference. So when we use our subconscious mind, actually we're tapping into that archive of all of our past experiences, stored wisdom, learned skills, and sound reasoning. So it's as if we have a built-in internal regulator that keeps us thinking and acting and deciding in a manner that's consistent with our ingrained values, right? our ingrained values. So it's like tapping into and trusting a vault of information and experiences as a learned skill. So it's often where we get that physiological feeling. It's a gut feeling. It's like that inner knowing, not inter, but inner knowing. So it's our intuition that's talking to us when we're being drawn to something. So that gut feeling. It's like, gosh, it's like you know that you know that you know. This is how it's got, it's that's our subconscious mind, our intuition trying to talk to us. It's how we make judgments about things. It's who we are at our very core, right? So in essence, when we use that subconscious area of our brain, that's our intuition. So Charles Duhigg, one of the inspirational people that I mentioned as a source for this training when I was developing it, said this quote, I love it, all decisions take place first in our subconscious mind. So think about that. The more we tap into it, listen to it, and begin to trust this, the better we're going to get at it. This is like any skill that we want to get better at. It takes practice, right? And practice builds competence, and competence builds confidence. And with that confidence, we begin to use that skill more and more. Make sense? Consider your intuition as your personal GPS, that global positioning system that helps us as we're driving from one place to the other if we need directions. Our intuition assists us in getting us to where we want to go, right? To make appropriate turns, judgment calls, decisions throughout our days. Just listening to our gut and our intuition. So with that shared, it's kind of like our body's clever internal compass, right? And it's specialized with that magnetic needle that points us to our very own true north, like a compass would, right? So we're pulled to what's consistent with our experiences and that which aligns with our own value system and our upbringing, right? So we've spent a lot of time, our entire lives, fine tuning that system in that temporal lobe of our brain, our subconscious part. So it's based on what we need and what we want. So our subconscious mind is a wealth of information to us. And we simply just need to learn to trust it, to listen to it, and then use it to guide us in some of our decision making. Decision making, it can be hard. I get it. That's why I chose to do this particular session. It's not a strength for me, decision making, right? I fall into a lot of traps with that, and we'll get to some of that. But decision making can be hard. Some decisions can be made, boom, like in a split second without much thought. But for those monumental decisions, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm not too comfortable about just trusting it all to a gut instinct. That's not what I'm recommending. Just leave it off up to our gut, right? But tapping into and listening to our intuition as guidance, it's kind of like a lost art. And it's an invaluable resource that too often gets left out of the equation. And that's what this session's about. Trying to learn to listen to that intuition, that subconscious mind, our gut, because it is that magnetic piece that pulls us to our value system. So when you're not accustomed to turning to that as a resource, you might find yourself questioning and self-doubting it and not fully believing that you can make the right call just based on your gut and your intuition, right? This is because sometimes that right decision often feels wrong. Making the decision may not actually be the hard part, making that decision, right? Particularly if you're following your gut, because your decision will usually be leading you to your true north and aligned with your value systems and in your comfort zone. Often, what feels wrong is not so much the decision, but the unease of what may follow after you've made the decision. And I'm going to refer to this as the fallout, right? What happens after we've made the decision, that's the fallout. So that leads us into our second objective, right? Which is recognizing benefits and barriers and what's actually holding us back from making decisions. So let's jump into this. We're going to start with the easy stuff first. desired outcome is met, hopefully. It's, self-confidence boost, trusting our abilities. This, we continue to build those skills in decision making. And there's some outlier benefits too. So the people that are waiting and waiting for that decision to be made, they can benefit from the fact that you finally decided to do it, right? Yeah. So, but there's more. So making decisions, you guys, can, as I mentioned, absolutely increase your self confidence. The more often you make decisions, the better you're going to get at it. Again, it's that learned skill that we referenced earlier. So, problem solving, the more you do it, the better you become, just like decision making. The more you do it, the more efficient you become. So, making decisions can also lead to stronger morale for the individual, stronger morale for the team, and you got good morale there, that's going to impact our workplace environment or even the home environment if those decisions are impacting our personal lives. So making decisions also can help employees learn to identify their strengths. Hey, I'm pretty good at that. That's easy. That's an easy call there, right? And we can, when we're identified with our strengths, we tend to volunteer up those strengths a little bit more. So that helps us help others on our team. So further benefits that are up here on your graphic on the screen here are, we get better at navigating challenges. We have a willingness maybe to try new things or maybe even take a little bit of risks. We seize opportunities and goal attainment or achievement happens. So these all sound like pretty good perks or benefits from decision making, huh? Why not get around to it, right? What are the barriers? So, what are those barriers that are keeping us from decision making? Odds are we can't take all of these on in detail, but with the time remaining, but we're going to touch on most of them, if not all of them. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rolling. Let's start first with this one, right? Overthinking, because that was your number one. But that overthinking, wading through all that back and forth and back and forth. Has anybody ever heard of, show of hands, heard of that term paralysis by analysis? Anybody ever fall into that? Oh my gosh, it can stunt you, can it? Self-doubt. That came up on the poll too. You guys kind of weighed on that. How would self-doubt interfere with our decision making? We just don't sometimes trust ourselves because you know what? That temporal lobe maybe stored experiences where we made a wrong decision in the past. Well, we'll get to that point. We need to learn to trust that. Maybe some of those negative self-talk statements or things like, what if I don't have what it takes? Or I can't gather the resources I need? Or maybe I'd never be able to do that, or I'd fall on my face for sure. Going back to one of our previous sessions, I think Kate used this, and I'm going to flip this turn. Daggone it, I'm not strong enough, I'm not tough enough, and people just don't like me. We just fill ourselves with all this negative stuff that increases that self-doubt. So being aware of that self-talk, oftentimes, like I said, holding us back from decision making is the fallout of what comes from the decision that feels wrong or keeps you from deciding. So when I say fallout, the fallout of a decision, so a lot of times these things, man, they can hold us back. We're afraid of who you might offend if you choose this way or lean that way, or maybe you're in too deep with all the planning and you can't back out now, or um, maybe you don't feel like you have the skill or the money or whatever it takes to get there. Maybe you're afraid it's too much work or you've bitten off more than you can chew. You've heard that term, right? So maybe you're afraid people are going to be mad at you with the decision. So that's what I'm talking about, the fallout. This is a lot of times that self-talk that we're telling ourselves. And yeah, it's a warning which pauses us to put the brakes on, but that's also a lot of times what keeps us from making the decisions. So all of these things are things that clearly we want to avoid. So what do? We procrastinate, right? And that's what holds us back from getting around to it, right? So let's take a look at procrastination. that's making decisions. Making decisions really requires us putting ourselves out there, and it can be scary. I get it. So instead of making decisions, a lot of times we put that decision off, or we're procrastinating to the point of making no decision at all. And we all know not making a decision, what it can be a decision in and of itself, right? So then we find ourselves moving into autopilot because if we can't make a decision, our brain's going to take the path of least resistance, and our decisions then will just run on repeat. We just do what we're used to doing, which is the same old thing, which might be just hitting that snooze button, right? One more time. So procrastination, it's not a laziness. And a lot of times people think might just fall to that thought. But according to McLean Hospital, based out of Massachusetts General in Massachusetts, they say that procrastination is really the stress in our lives. It's based on those unfounded negative beliefs, maybe not factual, maybe we had a bad experience, but it's what holds us back from making those decisions, right? It's what causes those things, like the fear of failure. It's things like our self esteem or how we are beating ourselves up because maybe we did make a bad call in the past, or I don't know, fear of, not being perfect if we're making the right decision is not, we've got a little anxiety built around that, overwhelm, all these kind of things contribute, right? Kind of looks like the poll that we just did a few minutes ago, doesn't it? So, I mean, there we are. This is founded in science and overthinking. That was our number one thing on that poll, the overthinking. So, or perfectionism. Let's take a look at this for a second. We all want to make the right decision, right? How can perfectionism hold us back from making a decision? Because we want it to be right. We want things to be perfect and having the right decision made. Perfectionism can definitely significantly delay decision making, for the fear of being wrong and not having, we all desire flawless outcomes, right? But it leads to overthinking, excessive analysis, and untimely paralysis. That's where the perfectionist struggle to commit to making a choice. A show of hands. Anybody kind of lean into this tendency, perfectionism? I get it. So then we have overwhelm. Whew, this happens. This is when you're experiencing like a state of emotional and mental burden due to like an excess of demands and tasks on our plate. And that can build up some strong emotions. We get little frazzled because that overwhelm, it can throw you into an emotional whirlwind, right? And that's not a good place to be when you're trying to make a decision, being emotional. Not going to serve us our not going to serve best for us. So, but we are all emotional beings. We know that if something's highly important to us, it's easy to get emotional over it because we're invested in it, and that's our emotions. But it's important not to confuse our emotions with those gut feelings because they both can be physical, right? Think about your emotions, whether you're happy or you're scared or afraid. Those emotions can be physical also, but we don't want to confuse those with that gut feeling when we're tapping into that intuition. Because, for example, when we're emotional, again, that's not the best time to be making a decision. Clear research advises us to settle into our emotions, recognize them before we go on to making those decisions. Our brain actually weighs out those emotions when we're making a decision, right? Those emotions that are happening, as we talked earlier, in our brain at that temporal lobe. We got to be able to get past that. Yes, consider it and thinking, oh, this is an emotional reaction I'm having. But that temporal lobe, if you've ever heard that term, getting emotionally hijacked, that's where that happens. Or maybe if you've not heard that term, emotional hijacking, which freezes you up, maybe you've heard that fight, flight, or freeze, which are reactions that like stunt us, right, from moving forward or, yeah, we get frozen, right? So if we can't get past those emotions in the temporal lobe, how the heck can we get to that frontal lobe, which is where we want to be able to plan and strategically think through some options for our decision, right? So be aware of those emotions because more often than not, our brain will take that path of least resistance, right? Which is to do the same old, and fall into the fall into that autopilot, or to do nothing at all, right? So after all, none of us want to get caught up in making a bad decision, do we? For many of the reasons that we just reviewed. You talked about the benefits and the barriers. None of us want to make bad decisions, but think about that term in and of itself, a bad decision. What if there were no bad decision, little twilight zone here? What if you could reconsider how you thought about your decisions that you determined were bad decisions, right? So each decision or lack thereof can actually shape our future. It's a life that we make for ourselves, and it's the person that we become through those choices and decisions that we make. But for example, let's just stroll through a couple examples. All right, so say you were undecided as to whether or not to take a friend up on an invite to a cookout, right? And it's like, "Ah, do I want to go, not go?" You bite the bullet, you decide to go. So you go to the cookout, man, you're not there 10 minutes and you've already got daggone barbecue sauce all over your outfit. And this is what you were going to wear to church the next day or whatever, but you ruined your outfit, right? It could be too soon to tell just based on that. As you're in the kitchen, say you're trying to salvage your clothing and get the barbecue out, and you meet so and so when you're in the kitchen who introduces you to somebody who's great at getting stains out. And while they're trying to help you get that stain rinsed out of your outfit, you strike up a real kinship, um, a real friendship in the process. And now maybe you've gained a new lifelong friend or a partner, right? So it's just too soon to tell if you're just looking at it. Another example, say years back, your grandmother came into some extra cash, and but she decided to skip on an investment that her banker suggested. Later, she found that she could have made oodles of money if she'd have made that investment. Yeah, she could have made some real profit. Good decision or bad decision? Initially looking at this, you're like, man, she lost out on oodles of profits there. But again, maybe that's not the whole story. It could be too soon to tell. Instead, she ended up taking some of that money and donated to a community organization. Well, later, she learned that her contribution actually funded some grants for students to get through school. And one of those grant recipients went through med school and grew up to be a surgeon. And then that surgeon actually performed a life-saving kidney transplant on your nephew, right? So it can be too soon to tell. It's just that once it's here, that experience, we don't want to label it as good or bad. There can still be lessons learned or things that we take from those experiences. So one decision, you guys, one decision at a time, we become who we are. We continue to store these experiences in our brains, and we do just that. We chalk it up to more experiences. So think back to a decision that you've made now, small or large, that maybe changed your life. And at the time, you might not have even realized the impact it was going to have. I had a friend who took a job with a law firm. And at the time, his gut, that intuition, was telling him that it's not the right decision. Not the right, he just knew he was miserable, he was stressed out, knew it wasn't going to be a right fit. But at the time, it offered insurance without a lapse. And his wife was going through cancer treatment at the time. Good decision to take the job or bad decision? Could provide peace of mind, having insurance, you got that. The ability to provide some stability for his family, that goes a long way. The opportunity to grow some resilience because he's stressed, right? Not liking this job. So the chance to make new connections. I saw that in chat too, right? And the fact that he's being employed, and can consider options in the future. No bad decisions when the intention is the right purpose. At the time, he may not have liked it, but it served the purpose. I love this quote by Simon Sinek. At least we could have a good story if nothing else. All right, so moving on. So what do you do when life gives you a bowl of lemons? Come on, what do you do when you get a bowl of lemons? Yeah, make lemonade. Amen. Yes, you make lemonade. All right. But listen, it's not lost on me, you guys. Granted, I can imagine there's probably people on the line thinking this is la la land and being told to reframe the situation and look for the silver lining and to make lemonade out of lemons. It might sound a little fruity, pun intended, right? But our decisions for this description for this summer short, you remember, is to join us for a unique session to examine decision making from a new or maybe different perspective. And that's what we're doing here, right? That different perspective is learning to trust and tap into our gut and our intuition when possible, right? So I'm not trying to make light of big decisions or bad decisions, maybe that you feel you made in the past, but how we can reframe that so those experiences in our temporal lobe can serve us well in the future. So decisions that appear as if we have chosen poorly, how can we improve upon that and make it powerful again? Find the benefit, right? You feel like it was a bad decision, find if there was any benefit. Then find the lesson. Is there a lesson that you can take from it? And then aim for the future, because hanging out and wallowing in that bad decision, yep, we're going to learn from it, but move forward. Move forward and take those steps, because it can help the sting out of something that where maybe we desired a better outcome. That leads us right into our last objective. So I got a few decision-making tools for those of you who want to put that prefrontal cortex and that frontal lobe to use. All righty. So we're going to take a look at these. Talked a lot about that intuition and that subconscious and tapping into it when it comes to decision. So how the heck do we do this? Well, we know we want to calm any emotions, positive or negative, settle into that, recognize they are what they are, emotions, and then settle into our physical body. And you can do that by just being present. Try it here in your chair right now. Take a couple deep breaths and let it out. Just settle into your physical body. You want to relax your shoulders, maybe your jawline if you're tensed and jacked up about something, right? Feel your feet on the floor. You might have some thoughts that are racing through your mind. Just let them float right through, right? Settle into that physical body and think of how you feel. And then consider briefly some of the past experiences that have given you peace when you listen to your gut, right? And then imagine how you might be able to engage some of your strengths if you decided one way or the other, because that can be contribute to that gut feeling. Tap into your intuition and then settle into that calm space and tune into any of those gut feelings, right? And that will help you make that decision, what you're going to do. That's going to help you with the what, listening to that intuition, the what you're going to decide to do. And when you've decided on the what, with the help of your intuition, then you can begin using that thinking brain and start planning and decide how you're going to do that and when you're going to do that, right? Mitigate some of that fallout from the decision. So for example, the what you decide to call, what you decide to do is to call the wedding off, right? Then you start, how are you going to how are you going to plan to share the news, right? With your would-be in-laws or your friends or guests. How are you going to share that? When are you going to share the news, right? So the what, say you decide to accept the new job. The how is, how will you share that news? How will you plan the transition from one job to the other? Then the when will you accept the job? When will you submit your resignation? When will you make the moves? So the what is the decision, what you're going to decide to do. That's your temporal lobe coming a little from that intuitive part. And then the how and the when is using that thinking brain, how you're going to go about doing it, right? When you're going to do that. That's that planning part. And so we've got some tools. That's not the whole crux of what this training is. But for those people who want these prefrontal cortex thinkers, right? You want some tools, some takeaways. And this is a very simple one. We'll start with this one. And it's a pros and cons. That's where you're weighing out a decision-making process systematically, and you list and evaluate the potential benefits from the drawbacks, right? Before you make the choice. This approach can help us make more informed decisions by considering the positives and the negatives of our options. There's one tool. Here's another tool you're probably familiar with. It's the SWOT analysis, right? So it's just this is a strategic planning tool to evaluate your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. On that left side is are the strengths and opportunities. This is what you can leverage that you have in that decision making. The weaknesses and the threats on the right hand side there, those are things that we're going to need to learn to navigate around, mitigate some of those challenges that we have. But by analyzing these four elements, we can make more informed decisions. So in that strengths box, list what your strengths are, put it in there. Opportunities, what are the different opportunities that you have? In the weakness box, list what some of those weaknesses are so you can figure out how to fill those gaps in, and then the threat. So this is a really very effective tool to help us in our decision making. All right. Here's another one, the decision making matrix. Right. And this is one I filled in for you because I thought it might be kind of fun. So it essentially is like a table where the column on that left represents options, and then the row across the top represents variables or features, right? And then those center cells, we can provide like a rating or a numerical scoring for each of those. So you kind of go through each row and give a score, and that total column there on the right, you add up your scores. And so this example is a list of restaurants, down the left-hand column, and across the top you have some criteria. So I filled these in for us, right? And that means, hey, it looks like we're going to have Mexican food tonight. That right column can help you a little bit. And this is the final thing that I'd like to share with you. This was from that licensed professional psychologist, Tatiana Garcia. She recommends taking these four steps into account when we are making decisions. Consider what those fears and reservations are, which we talked about those, the self-talk, the anxiety. Acknowledge them, what we can do. So consider, but don't live there. Think about that. Next thing is, then you want to put those things into perspective. A lot of times we end way far out at the worst case scenario, or maybe we're then think about the best case scenario. And more often than not, it ends up somewhere there in the middle. Think about those things and put them into perspective. Are they fact or are they fiction also? And then the third step is to set a time limit as to how much you're going to give this thought, how many opinions, how much feedback, how much perfectionism. Set a limit. It can cut down the overthinking. You don't want to run things into weeks and hours, and so set your time, what's realistic for you to come up with, and then once you've made your decision, do your best to try to commit to that decision. So hopefully there's some good tips. I'm going to encourage you to go forth and get around to it, right? And make those decisions. So you got some neat tools to do that. Really thank you for your time today with this summer session.